Night has its own scent. At Marigold Memorial Hospital in Chicago, it smells like a mix of cold disinfectant and reheated coffee. The long hallways echo with silence, no footsteps, just the soft buzz of fluorescent lights and the quiet squeak of a mop gliding around corners. In that silence, Nia Thompson, 29, wearing a faded Navy uniform, pushed her cleaning cart through the ground floor ER. No one noticed her. She arrived after, left after. Quiet as a devoted ghost. Though she'd worked there nearly 3 years, no one knew her full name. Her name tag simply read, Nia T, custodial staff. Those who came before her, doctors, nurses, guards, admin, called her the janitor girl or the night shift cleaner. Not out of malice, just because no one cared to ask. Nia didn't blame them. She was used to it. She'd learned to glide through patient rooms without drawing a single look, to clean dried blood without flinching, to overhear medical orders without revealing she understood every word. She cleaned what others left behind. Gently, precisely, neatly, like a seasoned surgeon in control of her tools. No one saw her stop by the hospital library each morning after shift, borrowing old medical textbooks, copying drug charts by hand, listening to physiology podcasts. No one saw the tuition bill tucked behind her mother's photo in her wallet, marked Term 3 balance, Howard University School of Medicine, leave canceled. And no one ever asked how a janitor knew how to correctly pronounce the name of a rare anti-shock medication most new residents still butchered. Every night, she wiped away the blood from surgeries that didn't go as planned. And every night, she walked away carrying a question no one ever asked her. If I know how to save a life, why am I still cleaning floors? No one had asked that until one Tuesday night. A scream ripped through ER room 1B. A patient was seizing. The on-call nurse fainted. The resident's hands shook. He couldn't recall the epi-dosage. And then, in the middle of the chaos, a woman's voice rang out. Low, but clear. Epinephrine 0.3, subcutaneous, not IV. Tilt the patient's head to the left. Heads turned. Nia, the woman who had been mopping just minutes ago, stood in the doorway, mop in hand. But the look in her eyes belonged to someone else entirely. ER room 1B was flooded with blinding white light and the erratic beep of a heart monitor. On the stretcher, a middle-aged man convulsed violently, his pulse spiked, skin pale, lips darkening to blue. We need a lead doctor. Now! A nurse screamed into the radio, her voice cracking with panic. The resident, too young, too new, fumbled through the emergency kit, his hands trembling. The syringe slipped and clattered to the floor. The head nurse lay collapsed by the edge of the table, knocked out cold after being struck by the patient. Emergency. Chaos. Everyone looked at each other. No one moved. No one could take control. And then, the voice came again, not shouting, not shaking, but each word cut through the room like a scalpel. Epinephrine 0.3. Not intravenous, subcutaneous. Outer upper arm. Tilt his head to the left, keep the airway clear. The young doctor froze, eyes locking on the doorway. The janitor. Still holding her mop. No one moved. Silence fell, thick like the pressure in a vacuum-sealed room. And then, like guided by an invisible force, the doctor acted. Step by step, exactly as instructed. The patient's heart rate began to drop. Breathing returned. Pupils narrowed. The anaphylactic shock was stabilized. When the heart monitor finally gave its first steady tone, no one clapped. Only the young doctor turned to face the woman still standing at the door, quiet, calm, and still holding a mop. Are you a doctor? He whispered. Nia met his eyes for a moment. Her gaze held no drama, only clarity. She shook her head and said softly, I'm just the night janitor here. Then she turned, pushed her cart, and walked away, like she had never entered. The door closed behind her with a gentle click. But everyone in that room knew what had just happened would never be forgotten. 3 hours later, the radio recording was played in the executive suite. CEO Rachel Langford, a woman who had stood in more trauma rooms than most of her staff combined, paused mid-sentence during a board meeting. She looked up, frowning. Who was that giving orders? Nia Thompson, the assistant replied. Custodial staff, night shift, no medical file. Rachel tapped her pen once, then said, have her in my office. Tomorrow, 8 a.m. That night, Nia stood alone on the rooftop of the hospital's parking structure. She peeled off her gloves, splashed her face with cold water from a rusted tap. The distant streetlight reflected in her eyes, blurring like old memories not yet dry. She whispered, like answering a question no one dared ask. I'm no longer a doctor. but I've never stopped wanting to save lives. The next morning, as the doctors gathered for their 8 a.m. rounds, Nia Thompson was called up to the executive floor, a place she hadn't set foot in once during her 3 years at the hospital. She brought nothing with her but a small, worn notebook, bent at the corners, cover peeling, and her old name badge that still read Custodial Staff, faintly smudged from years of wear. She didn't know why she'd been summoned. Only this: when the system takes notice of someone like her, it's rarely for anything good. 11th floor, CEO's office. The space was cold and polished, hardwood floors, a national healthcare map framed on the wall, and a scentless orchid on the table. The secretary nodded slightly, eyes a mix of curiosity and professional distance, then gestured for Nia to enter. Dr. Rachel Langford, CEO of Marigold Memorial, stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching autumn leaves fall over the city park. She turned as Nia walked in. "Miss Thompson?" Her tone was part question, part confirmation. Nia nodded, her eyes briefly meeting those of the woman before her, sharp, controlled, but not entirely closed off. "Please, have a seat." "I would rather stand." "Your choice, but I'd like to talk." A pause. Then Rachel went straight to the point. "Yesterday, you gave critical instructions during a severe anaphylactic episode, and you were right. I just did what I knew. What you knew doesn't sound like anything I've heard from a janitor." Nia tightened her hands, not from fear, but from the muscle memory of being interrogated under superior stares. "I didn't overstep. I saw someone dying." Rachel narrowed her eyes. "You studied medicine?" Nia nodded slowly. "Howard University. Med school, 2 years completed." "And then?" A pause, like she was choosing whether or not to unwrap memories that still had breath. "My mom was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. I dropped out, worked 2 jobs, then the scholarship expired. I didn't qualify for loans. No one hires a med student who dropped out. I chose cleaning, because at least it let me stay close to what I couldn't let go of." That last sentence made Rachel look up, not out of pity, but recognition. "Do you still study?" "Every day. Medical podcasts, old textbooks from the community library. I take notes. I practice with makeshift models. I know I'm not credentialed in this system, but that doesn't mean I'm useless." Rachel said nothing. Inside her, a quiet storm was brewing. The voice of clinical protocol clashing with something louder, more human, pounding in her chest like truth. "You do realize if anything had gone wrong, we could be sued? And if I hadn't acted, someone would have died." For the first time, Nia looked directly into her eyes. Another silence. Longer this time. Then Rachel exhaled, not in defeat, but in something close to belief. "I didn't bring you here to reprimand you. I want to understand why you're still here." Nia smiled, not quite with joy. "Because no one's looked at me long enough to ask that question." That afternoon, Nia's temporary employee file was opened for the first time in nearly 3 years. There was nothing remarkable in it. Position: contract custodial staff. Education: not listed. Status: night shift labor, hired through a third-party agency. But behind that file was a story no one had ever asked about. Until now. Nia Thompson was born on the west side of Chicago, in a neighborhood where the sound of sirens was more familiar than church bells. Her mother was a nurse aide. Her father left when Nia was still in elementary school. The family had no inheritance, only hope. And Nia was the one her mother had placed all of it on. Since she was a child, she'd loved anatomy. By age 13, she could name every bone in the human body by heart. At 18, she earned a full-ride scholarship to Howard University, School of Medicine, the pride of her entire block. She was one of only 3 black students in her class, and the only one who worked nights at a local pharmacy to send money home for her mother's blood pressure medication. Things were going okay until her second year. Her mother was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer. Nia did everything. She applied for aid, deferred classes, took extra shifts at a community clinic, switched to night lectures. But the bills kept coming: medications, hospital, rent, tuition. 4 crushing waves on a chest with no relief. And one winter day, when Nia opened the letter saying her scholarship had been revoked for insufficient credits, she simply folded it up and never went back. She worked in a nursing home, washed dishes in a school cafeteria, and eventually, through a friend, found a custodial position at Marigold Memorial Hospital. "I chose a hospital," Nia later told Rachel in their second meeting, her voice flat but steady. Not because the pay was good, but because here, I could still be close to what I loved. Medicine? Rachel asked. No, saving people. I don't need a title to understand that when a heart stops, degrees mean nothing if no one acts. Rachel didn't reply. She just looked at the woman in front of her, 29 years old, slender, dark-skinned, her face marked with fatigue, but her eyes showing no trace of it. No one had taught Rachel in med school that strength could come dressed in a janitor's uniform. That night, Nia sat alone in the basement staff lounge. She opened her old notebook, pages worn soft from years of use. On the very first page, still faintly visible, was a sentence she had written the day she first enrolled. I don't study to become a doctor. I study so no one dies alone. She read it again, then gently closed the notebook and smiled. Rumors travel faster than any official memo. The next morning, at the coffee kiosk on the third floor, two nurses whispered over paper cups. She's really just a janitor? Heard she went to med school, and now they're letting her assist with procedures? In the admin wing, Dr. Salazar, chief of surgery, slammed a stack of files onto the table with a frustrated sigh. I'm not signing off on any role for a custodian without certification. Rachel, still defending Naya, kept her voice steady. She didn't touch the patient. She offered temporary support instructions based on anatomical mapping. She had no right to speak in that OR, Salazar snapped. Yesterday was an exception, Rachel replied. And because of it, a child survived. In the hospital cafeteria, a group of senior nurses sat around a table. If they let her in the OR, next thing you know, anyone will demand clinical authority. You're hired to clean. Stay in your lane. Why squeeze into spaces you don't belong? Only one nurse sat quietly, Helena, who had watched Nia calmly guide a terrified family through the previous night's surgery. She said softly, if not belonging was the rule, I wouldn't be here either. I went to community college. The whole table fell silent, but it didn't stop with whispers. An anonymous petition began circulating inside the hospital, objecting to unqualified individuals being placed in roles involving life or death decisions. No name was mentioned, but everyone knew who it was for. That afternoon, in an emergency leadership meeting, hospital director Mrs. Hayes spoke slowly, choosing every word. I don't endorse breaking protocol, but I also can't ignore a life-saving intervention that now has media attention and a surviving patient to prove it. Some eyes averted, some narrowed. We have two choices, Hayes continued. Call this a one-time breach, or admit we've overlooked too much talent because we forgot how to look twice. That night, Nia was mopping the hallway on the 6th floor when Rachel approached. Is something wrong? Nia asked. Rachel smiled. No, but I think tomorrow you won't need to carry that mop. Nia looked up. Her eyes blinked slowly. Then what do I carry? A new badge. Clinical Support Consultant, Emergency and Simulation Training. At the far end of the hallway, Marty, the janitorial supervisor, stood watching. He didn't say a word, just removed his cap and placed a hand over his chest. A quiet salute for the woman who had just broken a silence that had lasted far too long. Monday, 7:15 a.m. A new nameplate had just been mounted on the glass door of a small office on the 4th floor. Nia Thompson, Clinical Support Consultant, Emergency and Simulation. No ribbon cutting, no red carpet, just a line of text. But for the first time, her name appeared on a door, not buried in a janitorial roster. Nia sat on a stiff swivel chair, scanning today's schedule. 0830, CPR training support with the new nursing cohort. 10, emergency OR simulation. First joint drill with tech and custodial staff. 15, meet with residents to share field-adapted respiratory stabilization techniques. In the training room, Dr. Alvarez, who once doubted her, was adjusting the defibrillator. When Nia walked in, he looked up and gave a nod. No apology, but a quiet acknowledgement. Those who once ignored her now paused to greet her. A few interns knocked on her door asking for feedback on crisis communication. Some called her Coach Nia. Others simply, "Hey sis, can you show me how to do this?" She hadn't changed her voice. She hadn't changed how she listened. She'd only changed her vantage point within the hospital. And with that, changed how others stood before her. One afternoon, after an emergency drill, Nurse Lorraine, who had once side-eyed her, quietly placed a hand on Nia's shoulder. I used to think what you were doing was crossing lines, but now I see you were just moving the line so others could step through. That night, Long after the hallway lights had dimmed, Nia stayed in her office. She opened the desk drawer. Inside, it was still there, her old ID badge, worn out blue plastic, letters barely visible. Night custodial staff. She didn't throw it away. She kept it, to remember that some roads are unpaved, but they still lead to the heart of the hospital. Downstairs, in a corner of the first floor corridor, Marty, her old janitorial supervisor, noticed Nia's name on the monthly leadership briefing. He smiled to himself. That girl who used to mop the floors now trains the doctors. Turns out, not everyone holding a mop is just cleaning floors. The next day, during a mass casualty response drill, when the mannequin patient began to suffer airway failure, no one on the team knew the wrist sweep obstruction maneuver. Except Nia. She demonstrated it calmly. 20 professionals watched. At the back of the room stood Dr. Salazar. He said nothing, just stood silently and took notes, like a first-year med student. That weekend, a handwritten note appeared taped to Nia's office door. "Thank you for giving me a reason to stay in medicine, S." No signature, but she knew who it was. Nia didn't save lives with a scalpel. She saved them with memory, with observation, and with the unshakable resolve of someone who'd been pushed out of the game, but stayed anyway. And while the media now called her an inspirational story, Nia just smiled and said, "I wasn't trying to inspire anyone. I just survived long enough for someone to finally see what I could do." Sunday morning. The hospital halls were quiet, bathed in soft daylight streaming through frosted windows, reflections stretching across the tile floor she had once mopped every night for 3 years. Nia Thompson walked slowly through the basement corridor, where she used to push trash bins, where she once bent down silently to pick up forgotten bits of gauze. She stopped in front of the old wooden cabinet, the one that held the janitorial shift schedules. Her hand slipped into the pocket of her crisp new white coat. She pulled out something small, her old ID badge, faded letters barely legible, custodial staff, Nia T. She couldn't throw it away, but she didn't want to carry it anymore either. She gently placed it in the drawer, not as something discarded, but as a piece of her heart left behind at the place where it all began. In the staff conference room during an emergency response training, a first-year resident, still trembling slightly as he held a syringe, looked at her and asked, "How do you remember all that? You didn't even go through formal med school." Nia smiled gently, then said, "Because I used to clean the places no one noticed, and I knew, if I didn't remember, no one else would be there to save them." A week later, at the annual medical conference, CEO Rachel Langford took the stage to present a new initiative, the Echo Staff Program, a bold move to identify and retrain overlooked talent already working within the healthcare system. The first slide had no hospital logo, just a black and white photo of a woman of color mopping a hospital floor. And one simple line, "You don't need a title to make an impact, you just need to be seen." That evening, as Nia left the hospital after a weekend simulation shift, a young boy in a school uniform paused in the hallway, looking up at her. "Are you a doctor?" he asked. Nia smiled, crouching down to his eye level. "Not exactly, but if someone falls, I'll be the first one to help them up." On her new name badge, a faint scratch remained, a mark from when it had been dropped once during training. She never replaced it, because, as she once said, "A scratch doesn't lessen the value. It proves I was here,